Spain told the United States it could not use its military bases. Trump called Spain absolutely horrible. He threatened to pull troops, launch a trade war, and end all commerce with the country entirely. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez went on television and said, direct quote, "We are not going to be complicit in something that is bad for the world just out of fear of reprisals from someone." From someone. He called the President of the United States someone. While the threats were still being issued, then Trump announced he was yanking 5,000 troops out of Germany and threatened to pull even more. Germany's defense minister called the withdrawal foreseeable, not alarming. Not devastating. Foreseeable. Like a delayed train. Then came 25% tariffs on all European cars. The EU said it would protect its interests and got back to work. Nobody in Europe is panicking. That is the story. The threats are real, the punishments are arriving, and Europe's collective response from Berlin to Madrid is the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug that took 3 years to perfect. Hartman just stared at the screen and said, dude, they're not even scared of him anymore. The question this video answers is simple. What happens when the world's most powerful leverage stops working on the people it was designed to punish? Here is what happened in order. The Iran war is the backdrop to everything. The United States conducted military strikes against Iran. European allies did not participate. Spain specifically denied the U.S. permission to use its jointly operated military bases at Rota and Meran for strikes linked to the conflict. Italy reportedly denied use of a Sicilian airbase after concluding proper authorization had not been followed. Trump's response was to threaten everything at once. Germany entered the picture when Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated publicly that Iran had humiliated Washington. Trump took this as interference and announced the withdrawal of 5,000 troops, then told reporters in Florida the number would go much further. We're going to cut way down. And we're cutting a lot further than 5,000. Germany hosts around 36,000 American troops. The Pentagon offered few other details. Then Trump was asked about Spain and Italy. His answer? Yeah, I probably will. Why shouldn't I? Italy has not been of any help to us, and Spain has been horrible. Absolutely horrible. He also announced 25% tariffs on all EU automobiles, accusing the bloc of failing to comply with a trade deal struck just last year. The EU called it unacceptable, said it would act to protect its interests, and released a statement. The statement was calm, specifically deliberately calm. Here is the detail most coverage moved past. When Trump suggested he could simply fly into Spain's bases without permission, we could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it. Spain did not escalate. It did not panic. It said it was a key member of NATO fulfilling its commitments and continued not providing base access. A threat of unilateral violation of Spanish sovereignty was issued, reported, and absorbed without changing Spain's position by a single degree. That is the buried story. Not that Trump threatened. Trump has been threatening Europe since 2017. The story is that the threats produced nothing this time. Not a reversal, not a negotiation. Nothing. Here is what makes this more than a diplomatic row. Europe has passed through several distinct phases with this administration. First came shock the Oval Office confrontation with Zelensky, the Liberation Day tariff blitz, the Greenland threats. Then came what one analyst at the Council on Foreign Relations described plainly as a high moment of European appeasement. NATO allies agreed to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP. A trade deal was struck in Scotland. Europe bent the knee and thought it was done, thought it had settled defense, thought it had settled trade. Then the demands kept coming. The same analyst identified the Greenland threats as the real turning point, not because Greenland matters so much specifically, but because it made the logic clear. Appeasement has a moving target. Satisfying one demand does not prevent the next one. The price of compliance is simply a higher price of compliance. Spain appears to have internalized this first and most completely. Sanchez's statement, "We will not be complicit out of fear of reprisals from someone," is not the language of fear. It is the language of a country that has done the math. Spain calculated that 2.1% of GDP on defense covered its actual security needs, said no to the 5% NATO target Trump demanded, and held that position publicly while the trade threats arrived. Kyle looked at the footage and said, "So they figured out that giving in just means more giving in? That's literally the first thing you learn on the playground?" Germany's response was quieter but equally revealing. Boris Pistorius calling the troop withdrawal foreseeable was not resignation, it was preparation. Germany has been expecting this for over a year. European defense ministers have been building the case internally that the continent must stop treating American military presence as a permanent foundation. Trump's withdrawal does not create that conversation. It concludes one already underway. The Republican members of the Armed Services Committee, who called themselves very concerned about the withdrawal, did so because they understood the strategic signal it sends to Vladimir Putin, whose war in Ukraine continues. The troops being removed from Germany were positioned there in significant part as a deterrent to Russian aggression. Their removal makes Europe marginally less secure from Russia. The same administration ordering that removal is also the most militarily aggressive American administration in the Middle East in recent memory. These two positions do not resolve into a coherent strategy. Nobody in this administration seems particularly troubled by that. The reactions from every corner are worth a moment because they are each their own kind of absurd. Trump's domestic base treated the troop withdrawal as strength. Finally, America is not subsidizing European defense. Republican members of Congress simultaneously called it very concerning and a gift to Putin without producing any visible internal debate. Both positions exist in the same coalition, in parallel, without friction. That is a neat trick. Europe's response was calibrated, non-panic, executed at a professional level. Poland condemned the ongoing disintegration of the transatlantic alliance in completely composed language. NATO said it was working with the US to understand the details of the decision. Diplomats speak for we were not consulted. Germany reminded the world that American troops in Europe serve American interests too, which is true and becomes more pointed the more politely it is said. Italy's defense minister noted that Italy had actually offered to protect shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a gesture the US military itself had appreciated, making Trump's claim that Italy was no help factually awkward. Giorgia Meloni, once described as Trump's closest European ally, broke with the administration over its attacks on the new pope, saying, "The pope has every right to call for peace." Trump called her the unacceptable one in response. His closest European ally. Unacceptable. Ordinary Europeans watching this mostly registered it as confirmation of something sensed for 2 years, that the post-war security arrangement underpinning the modern European order is ending, and that the ending is being announced from a Florida airport via the phrase, "a lot further than 5,000. Here is what this actually means. Leverage only works if the person being threatened believes you have something they cannot live without. For 80 years, American military presence in Europe was exactly that. The troops were not just troops. They were the physical expression of a commitment. Their presence said, if something happens here, we are already here. The problem is that Europe heard the withdrawal signal 2 years ago and started acting on it. The defense spending increases are real. The conversations about European strategic autonomy that used to be theoretical are now budget allocations. Germany, which spent decades being diplomatically cautious about its own military capacity for obvious historical reasons, is now accelerating procurement, building infrastructure, and being told by its own defense minister that the American withdrawal was expected. Trump is using troop presence as leverage over a continent that has spent 2 years reducing its dependence on that leverage. He announced 25% tariffs on European cars at the exact moment European governments are deciding to buy fewer American weapons systems and build more of their own. The punishment and the incentive to de-Americanize are arriving from the same source in the same week. Spain is the clearest execution of the logic. Spain said no to the bases. Trump called it absolutely horrible. Spain said it would not bend to fear of reprisals from someone. Tariff threats followed. Spain is still not providing the bases. The threats produced no change. And Spain's position that accommodating American pressure on something contrary to its values cost more than absorbing the consequences is now the operating position of most of Europe at varying volumes. Here is where we land. Trump called Spain absolutely horrible. He threatened trade, troops, and total commercial rupture. He said he could use the bases without permission. Nobody gave him the bases. He announced 5,000 troops leaving Germany with more to follow. Germany called it foreseeable and got on with the day. Some of these consequences are real. The 25% car tariffs will hurt European manufacturers. Troop reductions create genuine questions about Russian deterrence. None of this is nothing. But Europe is not behaving like something scared of nothing. It is behaving like something that has completed a calculation. The cost of standing firm is now lower than the cost of continuing to accommodate. That calculation took years to arrive at. It took Greenland and Liberation Day and the Oval Office and the Iran War and absolutely horrible to finish it. And now it is finished. Trump called Europe someone. Europe called Trump someone back. And in that exchange, without a treaty or a summit or a single dramatic ceremony, the arrangement that shaped the Western world for 80 years quietly finished ending. The troops are still leaving. The tariffs are still coming. Europe is building its own thing. And the leverage that was supposed to make all of this stop is sitting in a Florida airport talking to reporters saying it will go a lot further than 5,000. Nobody is writing that down anymore. That is the whole story.